Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Strength and Weakness podcast. I am Morgan, and I have my co-host Ellen with us. And today we are continuing the conversation around the allure of femininity. And if you joined us on our last podcast, you heard that we were, one, verbally processing this together, but two, even through that verbal processing, how Ellen and I had differing views of what the allure of femininity means and is. And so we're going to continue to unpack that together today. And I'm going to, pitch the first question over to you, Ellen. So looking back at our last conversation, let's start with kind of this broader understanding of like the allure of femininity. Like what, from your perspective, like why are we using the word allure? And then can you give us the understanding of what you would define femininity in? Is this a physical thing? Is it an emotional thing? Walk us through like why the word allure and what femininity means, definition there.
Yeah, well, first I'll say we don't have a messy moment because this is our messy moment. Trying to unpack this, like I basically told Morgan before we started filming today, I don't know what I think and feel about this. And so I need her as my friend to help draw it out of me because like we said in our last episode, most of the things we talk about on this podcast, we've had over a decade to kind of hone. This is something that's new, at least for me in my heart. And so I'm still processing through it. So I'm an introvert. I'm not used to doing that out loud in real time. So I need an excellent communicator like Morgan to help me figure out what I'm thinking and processing through. So I love those questions. What is it? Why would I use the word allure? I think that there's this general, often unspoken, but we see it spoken in very artistic expressions in movies and paintings, in poetry and things like that, about the allure, the mystery, the intrigue, the beauty of femininity in general, right? And so all that's wrapped up in there for me, the things that come to my mind immediately are the complicatedness of womanhood and women in general. Like we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but when you look at my husband versus me, my husband is very simple. He's not simple-minded, right? But he's very simple in what he wants, what makes him happy, what makes him tick. I am much more complicated. This was apparent in our like very first few months even of marriage when I said, I like massages and Starburst for gifts. And then all I ever got were massages and Starburst for gifts, right? And then eventually I was like, I also like other things, like you can vary it up a little bit. Sometimes I like some chocolate and, to go see a movie or something or a play. And he was like, what are you talking about? You said massages, Starburst. That's what I get. That's what you should be happy, right? Like everything is A plus B equals C. And I have just never met a woman who that embodies all of who they are. Now, I'm not saying there aren't women who are very analytically minded, very linear in their thinking. I'm just talking about this sort of deep, intrinsic complicatedness of women that and I think we even see this like with our anatomy, right? When I don't want to get too graphic on this podcast, but I'm a marriage and family therapist. I talk about sex all day long. And one thing that is very notable in male-female sexual relationships is that it's very simple to arouse and woo a man. It's very complicated to arouse and woo a woman. Our hormones are different every single week of the month, but also every single day. A man's hormones, steady, 24/7. They get every 15 minutes a hit of testosterone, keeps them focused, right? Until it's bedtime, then they get melatonin and they're asleep. Women, like we are just, it's like a roller coaster. We're all over the place. And it affects our ability to connect, our emotions, right? So there's like even in our physical anatomy, so much more complicated than a man. And I think there's something very aggravating about this complicatedness, but also something very intriguing and alluring.
Okay. So now break down femininity. Like what does that mean? I think for some of our listeners, when you use the word femininity, I think one, it could be triggering to people who are like, oh, feminists.
Right.
What does that mean? It's all these super left-wing people who don't shave their armpits and are barefoot and live in hippie land, right? Like, and they have these immediate thoughts of it. Like, what exactly does femininity mean to you when you're thinking of this allure, right? We're talking about complicated, intriguing mystery of what women are. Maybe you want to start with like a definition of femininity or like why why didn't you just say like the allure of females or the allure of a same-sex relationship? Like, can you define and break down a little bit, like what is femininity? Why that word? Define that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I think you're right. Femininity is one of those words that just means so many different things to so many different people. And I think even when I use it in different contexts, I mean different things. Here, I mean, when I'm talking about some of these characteristics, complicatedness, the mystery, the allure, the softness, but also the quiet strength of women, of femininity, I don't think that just women experience that and can relate to that. I really think like we as humans were created in God's image. And so I think masculinity is also inherently strong, but also soft, in a lot of ways. I just think we experience it generally in different ways. Men experience that softness, but also that strength in one kind of way. And women, we experience it in a different way. And I do think that way that we experience it is somewhat shaped by our culture that we're currently in. I also think it's shaped the way that God created us, right? He created our bodies a little bit differently, again, in general, than he did men's bodies, our hormones. There are lots of stark differences between men and women, again, generally.
Yeah.
And so I think when I'm talking about femininity, I'm talking about the way that women tend to experience all of those human characteristics, softness, but met with strength, allure, mystery, intrigue, like all of that complicatedness, but the way that women uniquely experience it in general.
I see. So for our listeners and even for myself, right, when we're talking about the lure of femininity, we're talking about not even same-sex relationships, but we're just talking about the female as a human and why that has so much mystery and just the female as a whole, right? Like, and so I think this is really interesting. And whenever I guess start a conversation just around like women in general, right? Like I always go back to Eve because she was the first woman. And so from your perspective, like what do you see in Eve that correlates to what we're talking about today?
Oh, great question. I'm so glad you made that distinction. Yes, I just thought we would have an interesting perspective on this as two same-sex attracted women. But I'm talking about the allure of femininity in just women in general that I think any human can see and appreciate. But I love you tying it back to Eve because that's my bread and butter is Eden and Adam and Eve. What I see in Eve is that she obviously had so much influence and power over Adam, right? Like not in this wielding, like I'm in control and you better eat this fruit because I said so, right? But like he was so smitten, I'm going to assume, by her. He was so intrigued by her power, her strength, her influence that he ate the fruit alongside of her, even knowing it wasn't okay, And she also was so bold, right? Like she was the one that was like, "Hey, I think we might be being duped here. Let's eat this fruit and see what the real truth is." And so in her boldness, she acted out. She was very vulnerable, right? Like, I think it's so interesting that she turned to Adam and in sort of blame and said, "You didn't step in and protect me," right? Like she's calling on her vulnerability alongside her strength, saying like, "I have the power to take this and even, intrigue you into sinning in this way too. But also I feel so unprotected that you didn't stop me in my strength," right? So like, I think, right, like talk about that complicatedness, right? Like poor Adam was probably like, "You said you wouldn't eat the fruit, so I let you eat the fruit," like now you want me to stop the fruit in the future, right? Like these are the fights that I see day in and day out in therapy with husbands and wives, right? Like wives are like, "I want to quit my job and be a stay-at-home mom," and the husband's like, "Okay, I support you." And then a year down the road, the wife's like, "How could you let me quit my job? I can't believe you didn't step in and protect me." And he's like, "What are you talking about? You said you want to quit your job. I was supportive." This is the complicatedness of femininity that I think we find in God, right? Like, I don't think women are complicated. I think it's men's inability to understand us that makes us seemingly so complicated. Because I've had it happen many times in my marriage even, where I've talked to my husband about something. He's like, "You confound reason. You make no sense to me." And then I talk to a female friend and they're like, "I totally get it," right? And I think the same is true about God. It's not that he's so complicated, and it's that our lack of ability to understand him makes him so mysterious. It's very frustrating. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've told God, like, for me.
Yeah.
I did this, I did everything I was supposed to do. It's not going the way I thought it would go. Why are you so complicated? Why are you so mysterious? It's very frustrating, but it's also very intriguing and alluring. It kind of keeps us on this like hamster wheel to be like, I need to continue to learn about you. I will never know everything about you. And I feel like that's sort of this esoteric allure of femininity that we see echoes of in poetry, in movies, in, literature and things like that.
Yeah, I was just going to make that connection to like modern day, because I also think you see this in marriage and relationship with even, people. And I mean, the divorce rate is so high right now. And I think something of this that you're talking through is this perpetual feeling of like, oh, the mystery of a woman, right? And I think you hear it a lot in society of like the chase, right? Like the man wants to chase the woman. And I think there's the allure, right? And I think you defined it at the beginning. It's like, ooh, I don't understand this woman, so I'm going to chase her and I'm going to try to figure her out. And then, right, an analogy that I heard a lot in college was like, when that chase is done and the man just like sits on the mountaintop and he's like, I made it. I climbed the mountain. I won. And then they're like, now I'm here type of thing. But I do think this, at least the conversation, you've probably seen it a lot more as a marriage and family therapist, but like, I feel like the conversations that I've had have been like, oh, the chase is done, or it got too complicated, and or the woman enjoyed the chase, but is unwilling to then be vulnerable enough to unravel, right? And I think in all of this complicatedness, it's like the female has to also be willing to peel those layers back and let people in. And that's a hard thing to do. I don't think that's super easy. And I don't think everybody is as self-aware in this respect of like, oh, I have these feelings and I understand my complications and here I am walking through all of them. But I do think I see a lot of this play out in relationships, both from like the man chasing the woman, but then also like being willing to dive into that complication together is, I think then the allure leaves, right? It's not as exciting. It's not as fun. And now it's like, we're just in a pile of complications together. It's like, there has to continue to be this excitement. And I think I was under the impression that like this excitement has to only be in the bedroom, right? Like that's where the excitement continues in marriage. But that has proven to be so opposite of what I've experienced, where like there has to continue to be this excitement and allure about learning the other person, even me learning my husband, but my husband learning me. I think he is somebody who really enjoys that. And so he'll be like, I want to understand you. I want to know like how you feel about this and why you do this. And he'll ask me a lot of questions. But all of that to say, I think the allure I see the most at the beginning, where it's like, ooh, females, this is exciting. And then it's like, oh, now the allure has stopped. And where do I go from here?
Yeah, I love that you're highlighting the difference between earthly fallen connection and knowing one another. And we can contrast that because we can't fully, perfectly understand that in a perfect way, like the way that God intended, because we're fallen. But I think we can contrast it a little bit and understand more deeply. And I think what I hear you saying is that infatuation in the beginning of that chase is so intriguing to us as humans in general. And you're right. And then there does come a point in every relationship, and there's not like one specific time, right? But at some point in every relationship, you kind of sink into deep devotion, and you do have to decide, are we still actively devoted to knowing one another, like more and more deeply, or now that the infatuation's over, are we done? And that is much more of an earthly experience than a heavenly experience, right? Like we've seen this being even like weaponized between men and women in relationships, especially from a woman's perspective. They weaponize that allure, that femininity, that mystery and intrigue to keep the chase going, because they think that that's what true, genuine, deep, authentic love is.
Right.
And then when that's over, they feel like that excitement is done and we either need to move on to the next relationship or just be perpetually unhappy in this relationship because that chase is over. And I think what's different about God is he doesn't the thrill for him is not in the chase, in our chase of him. The thrill is in us knowing him and us allowing him to know us. And so I think that only happens through that lifelong pursuit, on our part, because his ways are not our ways. They're much higher than ours, and we can never fully understand them this side of heaven, but we can continue to grow and grow in our understanding of him. And there is something very alluring to that. I'm 10 years into marriage, and I feel that in my marriage, right? That infatuation is gone for sure, but there is still this intrigue and mystery around both of us. I think, especially from my husband, right? Like, there is a part of him that cries out sometimes in annoyance, but sometimes in intrigue as well. I will never fully understand you. And I think he's right. He never fully will. I don't think I will ever fully understand myself either this side of heaven. But there is something so beautiful about him continuing to get to know me, not because I will withhold affection from him if he doesn't, but because I want to be known by him and he wants to know me. And I think that's what mirrors our relationship with God, when we can say, I don't understand you. I don't know why you do this or why you don't do this. And that makes me crazy sometimes, but I'm still devoted to knowing you better and better. I trust that you're good. You want to be known. I want to know you. I will continue that chase, not in infatuation, but in depth of devotion and love.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really wrapped up, I think, where I have one more question for you, but what I've taken away from what we've talked about, right, as we've unpacked this today, is that we started with this idea of like allure and mystery. But what I feel like we've kind of settled on is that females emotionally, physically depicted, I mean, from Eden, right, from this complication that we see in Eve, there really is this spectrum, right, that we're watching go from like allure to infatuation, and then it has to transfer to devotion and this ongoing relationship in its continuity, right? Because if we stay in this allure and infatuation, it really doesn't go deep. It just stays on the surface of, oh, this needs to be exciting. And when the excitement dies, the infatuation dies, because it's like, oh, well, this is, over. But how do we get to that devotion, and what does that look like? And what does devotion look like in marriage? What does it look like in friendships, right? For single women out there, or single men, right, who are just looking to build those friendships, because I do think everybody comes in contact with this allure and infatuation of women. I mean, it's everywhere, right? Like everywhere, in movies, society. I mean, even just in ads for clothing, whatever it might be. How do we move past that? Because I do believe that God wants us to not just see women as these physical beings, right? Or these complicated emotional beings, but like, how do we learn to appreciate and value these relationships with the women that God has so beautifully constructed? And I think even as we're talking about all this, I'm like, wow, God, you are so complex and you are so complicated from our perspective, our human perspective. But it allows us to see that like, there really is this beautiful complication about God that keeps us on this journey with him, of people who've been Christians for 60, 70 years and are like, I'm still learning about God. I'm still growing.
Right.
There are things that were unknown to me that he's making known to me now, which I think is just so beautiful. So my final question to you, Ellen, is, as we've kind of started to unpack this, right, you shared that the conversation would help lead you and unpack a little bit. What have you taken away from our conversation today that maybe you started with this idea of like, oh, I want to talk about the allure of femininity? Has our conversation in the last podcast and this podcast changed that question at all for you? Or is there something that you're walking away with that you maybe was unexpected to you?
Yeah, I think first I gotta say thank you, Morgan. You're an introvert's best friend to be able to help draw this out, because I felt so like convoluted in my own thoughts about this. I think what it has really helped me hone is the reason I feel passionate about unpacking this over the next, several, however long it takes, years maybe, is because I feel passionate about letting other people know that the same softness, allure, mystery, intrigue, vulnerability that has inspired countless songs, movies, plays, poetry, poems, can be found in God. Like he is that vulnerable. He is that mysterious and complex in an alluring, mysterious way. He wants to be chased and pursued. Like I think we're so used to seeing it the other way. God wants to pursue us and know us, and that is so true. But I think what I realized a couple of years ago, as I really started to unpack this in my own brain, although not very well, because you helped me unpack it much more effectively, is he desires those same things that we desire from him. He desires to be chased, not in that infatuation way. That's what we see in this earthly realm, in the poetry, in the movies, in the music, right? But he wants to be chased because he has this thrill of being known by us, of us constantly searching for him and striving to know him more and more deeply. And yes, he gets a thrill from knowing us, but it hit me a couple of years ago. He also gets a thrill when I find that mystery and intrigue in him, when I, jump through hoops and barriers in my earthly state to know him better, to know him more fully and completely, to learn how he wants to connect with me. And so I guess I just want to put out there for our listeners and for the world, really, God is a vulnerable partner he wants to be a partner with us in our life and our relationship with him, but he's very vulnerable too. And he can be hurt by us. And just like, femininity can be wounded, he can be wounded by us because of his inherent vulnerability and softness.
Yeah. And it just dawned on me too, as you were saying that, how in the same way with our earthly relationships, when that infatuation and mystery and allure dies, and when we lose that, how those relationships can be broken. And I see that the same in our, century of living, how when you become a new Christian, it can be very exciting. And that allure and that mystery can be there. It's a new relationship, right? And when you hit 10, 15 years, if we're not actively pursuing that relationship with God and just expecting God to meet us where we're at and expecting God to chase us and expecting God to be there, which are all true, right? He will always be there and he does love us and he does want to meet us where we're at. But when we stop pursuing him, the relationship can be broken. And I think that's where the perspective can shift, right? And so I think what I'm taking away from the conversation is this is a two-way street. And the same way that we have created this allure around femininity in our society, I think can also be translated to our relationship with God and how we can be moved to chase him, to know him, the same way we would do in our earthly relationships if we want them to be healthy and continue.
Yeah, I love that. The takeaway is he will never stop chasing us. We know that, but let's not stop chasing him with that mystery and intrigue on full blast, right? We want that to fuel our desire to know him. Sometimes it's going to annoy us, but it can also fuel our desire to understand him better and better throughout our relationship with him.
I love it. Well, we hope, listeners, that you guys have enjoyed this conversation. We know that it wasn't as beautifully packaged as we usually come in ready to talk about. But sometimes life is like that. Sometimes it takes a little bit more working out, a little bit more conversation, the same way that God wants to do that with us. And we hope that you continue to think about this, mull over it. And we'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, feedback, additional thoughts, please send them our way. And until then, we'll see you next time.